you were really a source for me early on too, that you used to say no end in sight. There's no one of the seven tools, your seven tools book, I think was
Yeah.
one of the early ones. And it was like, no end in sight. What does she mean by that?
Yeah.
I was really fascinated.
Well, and the way we crossed paths was with Plexus, I think. It seems to me maybe we met at a Plexus conference in LA or something, maybe
I
New
think it was
York.
the Mayo, the one I really remember
Oh, in
was the
Mayo.
Mayo Institute. So I got recruited for Plexus. Plexus was a little bit of an outgrowth of the Chaos Network. Chaos Network ended, right, at some point.
Yeah, it was Mark Michaels' work, and
Uh-huh.
it kind of there were many shared members, but I don't know institutionally that it was ever connected. But
Yeah.
they both emerged at about the same time, but they never merged. Yeah,
But those groups, that the interesting part about that was everybody was exploring from a different domain, and they all, not everybody had a practice, but they were equally, they couldn't let go. The theory was strong in each person, and it was a very heady time. I've always felt bad when I share references, like who really has made a difference. All mine are like 90s, late 80s, 90s, and then about 2000, it's dribbles off,
yeah.
and I'm not sure if I'm not paying attention, or those were the people that really made a difference, for
So
me.
this is a question, Keith, that I've been carrying over the last couple of years. Um, I have dabbled in things contemporary as they come out, and it's all rehashing and reheating and nothing really new. And so I thought, well, maybe it's just my bias and that I should ask and see and look more deeply. And so I began to ask people in the sciences what new, like what's on the edge of the scientific front. And the people who were there with us early say there's really nothing that has moved the scientific field forward in a meaningful way since the mid 90s, early 90s. That what has happened, and it's not a bad thing, it's just an evolutionary step in the science where there's a point at which the theory comes to a place and the practice becomes dominant. And so building methodologies and building methods and perpetuating the work, applying what people know. And so it's a kind of stabilizing time, not a moving forward
Mhm.
in theory. But that really has been what's been happening over the last 3 decades is um, application and deepening and grounding practice as opposed to moving it in past that paradigm shift. And I think it's because it's just difficult for people to cross the paradigm in any like perpetual meaningful way.
Well, I'm very glad you say that, because I felt like maybe I was being a little lazy in my reading. And what I have read is like, oh, well, okay. And my big question lately that I ask and then start answering, of course, but is sure, it works in practice, because there's some things about the work that immediately show results and get people very excited. But what about theory? And I've been forced into the position of, not forced, but it's strongly encouraged by people to talk more about the scientific basis for it. And it's good. I'm really enjoying it, and I'm looking for new material. And maybe that material is going to come out of our communities. I mean, people are publishing now, but it's more about practice than theory. But uh, I think in this world where we're working most of the time is people trying to do something in their organizations or in their movement.
Yeah.
There's plenty to be published, plenty to be
Yeah.
published.
Do
It's
you
not
remember
theory so much, but go ahead.
do you remember Regina Beirut? Was that her name?
Yeah, but it's not Regina. It's Beirut is her first
Beirut
name.
is her first name.
Beirut, and she did the Iron Butterflies, wrote the Iron
Yeah,
Butterflies
and
books. Yeah.
she said once that in terms of the science, that the next wave of learning
Mhm.
has to come out of human systems,
Oh,
because mechanical systems are now not nearly as interesting or rich as human systems, and that the new theory base is going to come from that side of the world, because human systems are so much more open and high dimension and nonlinear than other kinds of natural systems, that that's where the theory is going to come from. And so I agree that our ability to take our practice and reflect on our practice in theoretical ways is an important step, really important step.
her husband is Roger Lewin, so we should look for his next
That's right.
book
I had forgotten
because
that.
Roger's a wonderful writer. Some of his early stuff was way ahead of anyone else, a little deeper, not quite as popular, but quite deep. And the other great writer that maybe we should look to is Tom Petzinger. He went off into biotech.
Where did he end up? The last thing I
He,
knew, he was going to be an entrepreneur.
yeah, he entrepreneured his way into some biotech things in where do the three rivers come together? Pittsburgh. And he was running a company and got out. He was a Wall Street Journal, Monica and Celeste. He was a Wall Street Journal article who wrote, it was kind of complexity on the front lines, and it was a business column. But he was full on complexity inspired and thoughtful and a great writer. So we have writers, but they haven't, those two I would look to for new work.
Yeah. Well, and it was interesting when Lewin's first book came out called Complexity. There was another book named Complexity that came out the same time from Waldrop.
Yeah.
And Waldrop's history and theory came from the physics side of the world and mathematics, and Lewin's perspective came from the biological world.
Mhm.
And so those two patterns, I think that distinction has lain underneath the work in complexity and complexity applications all along. We don't very often make it explicit, but I think it's a difference that you can really see between people like Taleb and Brenda Zimmerman was very much biologically oriented.
Mhm.
Um, Dooley was much more um, mechanical engineering and thermodynamics oriented. And so the two different kinds of sciences have really
Yeah.
um, led to different strands of the work all along.
And I think Meg Wheatley's early on was more physics based, but yeah, it definitely made a difference in who followed and the kinds of things that they generated. But I
Yeah.
know in my work, people really do, they're deeply attracted to the ecocycle, which comes right from ecologists, panarchy, the system embedded in system, ecocycles on top of each other all the way up. And those are uh, there's real depth there for people. They can keep working with that. And it's fundamentally changing how they do their work if they bring the ecocycle into their everyday activities.